James DiEugenio has a master's in history from California State University, Northridge. He's a retired teacher who's written or co-edited 4 books on the assassinations of the 60s, Destiny Betrayed, The Assassinations, the JFK Assassination, The Evidence Today, and JFK Revisited. The last volume is the companion piece to Oliver Stone's 2 recent documentaries on the Kennedy assassination, JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass and JFK Destiny Betrayed. Jim wrote the screenplays for both of those films. He's lectured widely and made appearances on many broadcast programs about the subject. He's the editor and publisher of the online journal kennedysandking.com, which features articles, news stories, and critiques of works about the 4 major assassinations of the 60s, JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, and RFK. He's one of 5 contributors to a new book called The JFK Assassination Chokeholds That Prove There Was a Conspiracy. James DiEugenio, welcome back to Coast AM. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me back, Richard. I appreciate it.
You are, as I say, one of 5 contributors. 3 of the 5 are lawyers. That's no accident, I'm guessing. Why lawyers?
Okay, the 3 lawyers are Matt Crumpton, Andrew Eiler, and Mark Adamczyk. Eiler and Mark Adamczyk did a lot of really good work on the JFK Record Collections Act, which, as you know, is in court right now in the Northern District of California. All right, because they're trying to get the last of the records out, and Biden doesn't want to give them up. All right, Matt Crumpton has a very good podcast called Solving JFK. All right, and the guy who really pushed this project was Paul Blow, who I think you've had on, one of your shows. All right, and so he decided that with 3 lawyers, we could do something about setting up what they call standards of proof, and whether or not the Warren Commission or the House Select Committee had them. And if not, why not? And what would have happened in a real court of law, if Oswald would have had a trial, And so what the book does, it picks on several very, very strong aspects that vindicate Oswald. And the weight of them together makes it pretty obvious that Oswald could have never been convicted at a trial. And that's why neither the Warren Commission nor the House Select Committee ever spelled out what their standard of proof was in convicting Oswald. So that's really what the book is about. Now, to talk about some of the specifics, all right, one of them we talk about is the whole enigma of John F. Kennedy's brain, all right, which I believe is a very, very strong piece of evidence that Oswald did not shoot Kennedy. Another one is the proof of a front shot. I didn't do that one, okay, but that's a very well done one. There's also the proof that Oswald was not on the 6th floor, all right. There's also all the dissenters. I think Paul Bloom wrote this chapter. All the official dissenters, from the beginning of the case till the end. Many of them are lawyers. And it doesn't just mean Jim Garrison. You also had people like Richard Sprague, a very proficient Philadelphia district attorney. You also had Bob Tannenbaum, all right, chief of New York Homicide, okay, who came down to be the deputy counsel for the House Select Committee. You also had Jeremy Gunn, who was the ARB chief counsel. These are all very accomplished attorneys, and they all tend to say that Jeremy Gunn, for instance, said, I'd much rather be defending Oswald than trying to convict him. Tannenbaum said words to the effect that you couldn't convict Oswald in any court in America with the Warren Commission's evidence. All right? So that part of the story is where our lawyers come in handy.
Right.
Andrew Eiler did a very nice job outlining what standards of proof really are. There's three main groups, and the strongest one, of course, is beyond reasonable doubt, which is the one that would be applicable in this case. You would have to convict Oswald beyond a reasonable doubt, And he did a very nice job researching that topic about how standards of proof in a homicide case came about. And it came about because, that's such a very strong standard, beyond a reasonable doubt. It came across because it was designed, get this is almost too eerie to be true. It came about because it was to protect the community from the collective guilt of convicting an innocent man. When I read that after Andrew wrote it, I said, could there be anything more apropos to the Kennedy case? I mean, isn't that what's happened? Is that the United States has become a divided country over the issue of did Oswald get a fair trial or not?
Right.
Did we convict an innocent man? And remember, Oswald was literally rubbed out on Sunday following the assassination, and then he was convicted by the Warren Commission. All right?
Right. He didn't get a trial.
Well, not.
He didn't get a chance to defend himself. Yeah.
This is one of the things that is so puzzling about this case. And, at the 60th anniversary, it's just as puzzling now as it was then.
Did he...
Oswald not only was denied to have a lawyer, but there was no judge. Okay? And on top of that, the guys who were convicting him were all lawyers. So they had to know what they were doing in depriving him of any kind of what we call due process. All right? And you know what the excuse was? That, because I'm sure you're aware of this, Mark Lane petitioned the court. He wanted to defend Oswald. All right? And J. Lee Rankin, the chief counsel for the Warren Commission, said words to the effect that there are too many secret documents that certain agencies want to keep secret and that we could not share with you. Well, Richard, that excuse is still going on today. All right? This whole secrecy sensitivity thing is still going on in 2023. When will it end?
My previous guest, Chuck Ochelli, was saying that there's still documents relating to the Lincoln assassination that are that have not been declassified. 160 years later. What do you mean by chokehold? What is a chokehold?
All right. Okay. This came about because Malcolm Blunt, the famous, well, he's actually not famous, but he's a very well-respected British researcher. For my money, he's probably the best archival researcher there is. He told Paul Blow that, in his opinion, the documents he uncovered on the filing system at CIA about Lee Harvey Oswald was a chokehold in the case because you cannot explain it in any kind of innocent or what they call benign way. The opposition would be stymied in court trying to explain it away in some innocent manner. because you just can't do it. Do you want me to describe what that is?
Yeah. What do you mean by the CIA filing system as it relates to Oswald? Why is that a chokehold?
All right. Let me explain this, because I believe it's very important to understand this. And in order to explain it, I have to bring up a woman by the name of Betsy Wolfe. Betsy Wolfe was an analyst for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. All right. Her job was to study the Oswald file at CIA. So what she did is she first got a copy of every division charter in the agency, which I think at that time there were 9 of them. So she got the charters, and then she studied the charters all the way through. She then drew an imaginary graph as to, okay, then this is what Oswald's file should have done in the CIA when it came in, all right, where it should have gone, as a file collection document. Well, then she asked for the file, and she was very surprised that Oswald's file did not do what she thought it was going to do, all right? She thought that based on the charter, that it would go to what was called the SR division, Soviet Russia division. It didn't go there. It went into a top secret group inside the Office of Security. All right? Now, this very much puzzled her. Why? Because the Office of Security does not open 201 files. All right, a 201 file is the most common file in the CIA, and there's about 5 different ways it can be opened. There is no doubt that Oswald's behavior in the Soviet Union merited opening up a 201 file, all right, which is not just the most common file, but it's one of the files that almost anybody in the CIA can look up if this person comes across their radar screen in their work. But there wasn't a 201 file open on Oswald for 13 months. This is the other thing that very much puzzled her. So she was so flummoxed that she started calling people in from the agency, most of them who were retired, okay? And they all agreed with her. They said, look, when Oswald went over there as a defector and hinted that he was going to give up secrets of the U-2, that should have opened the 201 file, okay, on Oswald. All right? They also agree with her that his file should have gone to the SR division. So she asked more questions. And then finally, in, I believe, the fall of 1978, she called in a guy named Robert Gambino. Robert Gambino was, at that time, in 1978, the chief of the Office of Security. All right? And she went ahead and described his problem. And Gambino said, look, it doesn't matter how many documents come in on a certain person. It doesn't matter if they are pre-stamped. If the client customer goes to the first gate, which is called the Office of Mail Logistics, and by the way, I never even knew that existed until I read Gambino, all right? And if he requests they go to him, then that's what will happen. So in other words, Oswald's file was pre-rigged before he ever got to the Soviet Union. So, now, how do you explain something so unusual?
He's a CIA asset.
What?
You can explain it if he's a CIA asset.
Well, that's exactly what I mean. Okay. All right. And by the way, we had a former CIA officer who looked at this, J. Tennant Begley, sometimes called Pete Begley, and he looked at this and he said Oswald was a witting collaborator. Okay, there's no other way you can explain this. You know, he was a witting agent, a defector, part of a program. All right, and so now let me conclude this story because I think this is the capper. This stuff did not come out until the new millennium. I believe the release date was 2001. In other words, 3 years after the ARB closed its doors, after the review board closed its doors. When Malcolm sent them to me, they were in handwritten format. In other words, to my knowledge and to Malcolm's knowledge, this information was never turned into a memorandum, was never turned into a typed memorandum. And it's not in the House Select Committee files. So in other words, if there had been no review board and there had been no Malcolm Blunt, I doubt if anybody would have ever discovered this stuff. But to me, I believe, and this is in the book, all right, I believe it's of the utmost importance. And that's what we mean by a chokehold, where you can't explain it any other way. You know?
It's indisputable.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, can you imagine presenting this in court? You know?
It's very telling. So it is highly suggestive that the CIA did not want to open a 201 because Oswald was their guy.
Right.
He was.
They wanted to keep his identity a secret.
Right. I'm just kind of between a rock and a hard place here in terms of the clock. I'm rolling into the bottom of the hour, so we'll just reset here. Remind people that James DiEugenio is with us, one of 5 contributors to a brand new book. It's the JFK Assassination Chokeholds that prove there was a conspiracy, and we'll talk about some of those chokeholds, including evidence of Oswald impersonators, the difficulty in placing Oswald on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository building at the time of the assassination. Of course, we'll talk about CE 399. That's the lone gun, or the magic bullet, rather. The magic bullet that props up the whole lone gunman theory. We'll get into all of that and much more. Back with more of our conversation right after this timeout. And we are back with JFK Assassination Chokeholds contributor, James DiEugenio, one of 5 JFK Assassination Chokeholds that prove there was a conspiracy. You hinted at this earlier. One of the chokeholds has to do with the president's brain. A lot of interesting mysteries surrounding the brain during the autopsy.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that one up, Richard. That's one of them that I wrote. And I truly believe that this is sort of like our guiding light today, you know, sort of like a lighthouse in the distance that guides us to the truth. All right. The stuff about this Kennedy's brain has become, I believe, so malevolent and so really probative as far as evidence goes that, again, I don't think there's any way out of this. All right? I'm not a lawyer, but if I was a lawyer, I'd love to be presenting this stuff in court. You know, my first witness would be John Stringer. John Stringer was the official photographer for the Warren Commission. He was supposed to have taken the autopsy photos. If you can believe it, it wasn't until 1996, I believe, that he was placed under oath and questioned about the procedures that he used, all right, and the techniques that he used, and the film brand that he used. The ARB, led by Chief Counsel Jeremy Gunn, did a very intelligent thing. Before they confronted him with the evidence, they asked him these kinds of questions, so he couldn't switch his story if it clashed with the evidence. So once they questioned him, they brought him into a room and they put up on an easel what are supposed to be the official autopsy photos of Kennedy's brain. And Stringer was, to put it mildly, taken aback. He walked up to the pictures, examined them closely, and first he said, "This is Ansco. I didn't use Ansco film. I used Kodachrome. I used Kodak Ektachrome. All right? And you see these numbers here on the lower right-hand corner? This means this was part of a press pack. It was taken in series. That's why they have numbers. I didn't use a press pack. Okay? So
he didn't take these photos are not his. So
that's what I'm going to get to next. And so Jeremy Gunn then asked him, do you then, on the basis of what you just said and saw, deny that you took these photographs? And he said, if that's Ansco and if that's a press pack, I didn't take these pictures. And he later said that they were both true, that it was Ansco, okay, and it was a press pack, all right? So that would be my first witness. I would then call up any kind of practicing neurologist, and I would ask them, what is the average weight of a male brain? All right? And I know what the answer would be, about 1,340 grams. I would then have him look at the supplemental autopsy of President Kennedy. And then I would say, now, what does it say there is the weight of Kennedy's brain at the supplemental autopsy? And the guy would say 1,500 grams. And I would say, well, isn't that more than the average by a significant number? And he would say yes. Then what I would start doing is I would start showing pictures of the back of Kennedy's car, the limousine, with all the blood and tissue blasted all over it. I would show films of Jackie Kennedy reaching out the trunk of the car to get part of the brain that was blasted away. I would then show the Zapruder film to show the huge head explosion. Then I would read the testimony of Bill Hargis, who was one of the cyclists on the, and remember this, on the left side of Kennedy's car. And it would say that he was hit so hard that he thought it was a projectile. It was really part of Kennedy's brain. So in other words, we're supposed to believe that with all this demonstrative physical evidence of Kennedy's head being blown apart, of it being in the back of the car, out of the back of the car, to the left side, on a policeman, all right, his head exploding in the air in the Zapruder film. We're still supposed to believe that Kennedy's brain was above average in weight. Then the last people I would call would be the witnesses at both Parkland and Bethesda who said they saw a severely damaged brain, sometimes as much as 1/3 of it gone. And there's about 12 or 13 of them. So is all this physical evidence wrong? I don't think so. I do not believe for one instant that those pictures and those illustrations depict Kennedy's brain. And I believe that the main reason that this happened is that wherever Kennedy's brain really is today, all right, it would depict evidence of 2 bullet wounds to the brain. And on top of that, we have this fact. When I interviewed Henry Lee for the film JFK Revisited, I did a pre-interview with him out here in Malibu. And I asked him, I go, can you do a trajectory analysis in the Kennedy case? And he said, you can't do one. And that isn't what I expected him to say, frankly. So I said, well, why? And he said, because neither wound was dissected. Kennedy's brain should have been what they call sectioned. That is, either in what they call a bread loaf style. In other words, you cut it like you're cutting a loaf of bread.
Right.
Okay, or what they call a pie section style, in which you cut it like a pie. All right, and you end up with like 6 or 8 triangular type pieces. Now, the reason you do that, of course, is this will tell you, A, how many projectiles were fired, and B, where they went. All right? So why wasn't that done? Why wasn't that done? That's an incredible failure of the JFK audit. To have someone be killed by a gunshot wound to their head and you don't section the brain, again,
right, because
explainable.
Right, because it would show evidence of 2 bullets, which means no magic bullet theory, no lone gunman theory.
Right. I think that would be a logical and a very, I believe, strong conclusion to all this evidence.
What about the autopsy sketches?
Oh, well, then those are very interesting because one of the things that the House Select Committee said in their report, I think it's Volume 7, page 37, is that although there is some discrepancy between the descriptions of the back of Kennedy's skull, all right, the people who saw it at Bethesda Medical Center where the autopsy was performed, they say that the back of the head was intact. That's what the report says. That is a lie. Because when the review board went ahead and declassified all this evidence that the House Select Committee had hidden, it turned out that just as many people as Bethesda at Parkland saw this hole in the back of Kennedy's head, and they drew pictures of it. They actually drew pictures of it, of what it looked like. All right? So this is really remarkable stuff that was declassified.
In other words, it's an exit wound. He was shot from the front or the side, not the back, the fatal wound.
Yeah, well, see, then this relates to another point that we brought up in the book. That is the strong evidence that there was a front shot. Okay, and what this is largely based upon is the fact that in the front of Kennedy's X-rays of his skull, there are a multitude of what can only be considered dust-like particles in the front. All right, but the larger particles from Kennedy's brain are in the back. And by the way, we got this from what was supposed to be the House Select Committee's expert. All right, he said that the smaller particles will stay near where the bullet entered. Okay, because they don't have any real power because they're so small, all right, to travel through tissue. All right, whereas the larger particles will be able to do that. The larger particles in this case are in the midsection or to the rear of Kennedy's skull. And that is very strong evidence that Kennedy was hit by a frontal bullet. And if you combine that with the 42 people who said they saw a blasted out evulsive wound in the rear of Kennedy's skull, that's pretty powerful, I believe. And then, of course, I don't have to tell you this, but then you combine this with the action of Kennedy in the Zapruder film, all right, which is back and to the left, then I think you have a very powerful case that Kennedy was hit from the front.
Did any of this, well, some of this came up during the House Select Committee in 1979, right? When they found it was a conspiracy.
Actually it didn't.
It didn't, okay. None of it.
Yeah, the only thing that came up was the Zapruder film. The thing about the particles, Sturtevant got the wrong X-rays. All right, he got the enhanced X-rays, which pretty much white out the smaller particles in the front of the skull, so they're really not visible. All right, when these radiologists who we know, like David Mantic, okay, saw these things, all right, he saw the unenhanced version in which you can see all these small dust-like particles in the front of the skull. And that was the big giveaway. And then, of course, they covered up the evidence of the hole in the back of Kennedy's skull. So this really did not come out until I guess I've been using that term so much, I guess I should explain what it is to any of your listeners who don't know what it is. When Oliver Stone's film came out in 1991, it created a giant furor, okay? Because at the end of his film, he had a tagline which said, "The files of the last investigation of President Kennedy's death, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, are classified till 2029. Well, when the public learned this, they started doing a lot of phone calls, a lot of letters, etc. This forced Congress to have hearings. And as a result, a citizens panel was put together called the Assassination Record Review Board. And they went ahead and started declassifying all this information. It was a very extraordinary move by Congress to do this, all right, because it usually takes years to declassify these documents, right? Well, the review board went to work and they declassified something like 60,000 documents in about 4 years, which is really remarkable. And this is how we found out about this stuff. That's how we found out about this. So it's indirectly because of Oliver Stone's 1991 movie that I can talk to you about this evidence.
Right, right. They were all to be declassified by 2017, but they were not, correct?
That's absolutely correct. And Donald Trump actually tweeted about it about 2 weeks before they were supposed to be finally declassified. And then what happened? Well, on the day they were supposed to be declassified, the FBI and the CIA went into Trump's office, and one way or another, they intimidated him not to do it. So they were first delayed 6 months. Then Trump delayed them another 3 years. In other words, into the next presidency. Well, we know Biden was the next president, and then he deferred them for another, I believe, year. And then he did something even worse. He now has changed the whole rules of the review board and how they can declassify documents. Congress has let an executive in the White House, the president, overrule an act of Congress.
Wow.
Okay.
Jim, I got to take a time out. We'll
All right.
break away, come back, and discuss more of the JFK assassination chokeholds that prove there was a conspiracy. James DiEugenio stays with us.